Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 68. Aren't you tired of being nice? Don't you just want to go apeshit? Days kept passing in an endless, exhausting cycle, and nothing seemed to change. Debilitating loneliness settled around him like a second skin, and despite his best efforts to distract himself, he couldn't crawl his way out of it. It was like an annoying tag scratching at the nape of his neck. Always there. He felt his sanity fraying at the edges. Izuku was so sick and tired of being alone. Day in and day out, he sat by himself. At school, at stakeouts, and at home, he was alone. He'd been trying to relegate a short rest time right before patrols so that he would be more alert and distance himself from the crushing dread of his own loneliness. But that wasn't going to work today. He felt like he was going to crawl out of his own skin. So he decided to leave for patrol a little early. Eraser was always there before him. Even after they stopped going through drills and spars for a couple of hours before they headed out, they assumed he'd just come straight from UA when they did that, but they met much later nowadays, so he had no reason to be early anymore, but he always was anyway. They wondered why that was. Eraser had said, "We love her," when he was talking about his cat, and they knew he didn't make the bentos he brought each night. They wondered who he went home to, and they wished they still had someone to go home to. Wished they still had a home to go to at all. They brushed the thought away as quickly as they could as they threw themselves along the rooftops. Jealousy didn't help anyone, least of all them. They had never been more glad that they left early for anything in their life. The image of the scene that they could have walked into was going to haunt them forever, because as they peeked their head up above the ledge from the fire escape, they saw Eraser sitting in his usual spot, looking out over the city. But someone else was there too. Someone uncannily silent was creeping up behind him with a gun pointed at his head. It felt like time froze in that moment. They heaved themselves up and over the ledge quicker than they had ever done before and screamed out his name. They wouldn't get there in time. They were so close, but still so far. As they ran at them from the edge of the roof, the two were in a picture-perfect profile, just close enough for them to see every detail of Eraser getting his brains blown out, but too far to stop it. Before his name fully left their mouth, they remembered their knives. They had the perfect angle. If they could sink it into the man's outstretched arm, it might be enough to knock his aim off. It had to be enough. It had to. This was all they could do. This was all they had left. Pleading and praying to no one and anyone who would listen, they let their knife fly. Each millisecond that passed by felt like a lifetime as they watched its trajectory bring itself perfectly into the man's forearm. Even still, they saw the muzzle flash of the gun firing as Eraser turned to them to see what they were screaming about. He was standing. He was still standing. He had to be okay. It had to be enough. Everything the man did was completely silent. His feet on the gravel made no noise. The gun firing made no noise. And they were sure that the breaths that Eraser should have been able to hear were silent too. His mouth opened with what must have been a cry of pain, but it was silent. It must be a quirk. Hoshino something. Quirk, soundwave manipulation. They had a profile on the man already, but they'd yet to get a good look at his face. As Eraser took in the state of them and saw where their attention was pointed, he whipped around and disarmed the man before Ivy even made it to his side. Oh, but that wouldn't be enough to save him. No. Heaven itself couldn't save this man now. Heedless to anything Eraser may or may not be saying, Ivy punched the man's jaw with every bit of force they had in them, and he dropped like a brick. He was dazed but still conscious. Good. Hauling him back to his feet by the collar, they pressed a knife to his neck before he even realized he was standing again. Shota was reeling. He'd just been sitting on the ledge looking over the city waiting for Ivy when they came over the side of the roof screaming his name with guttural horror. Before he even had the time to react, he felt the shockwave of a bullet leaving the chamber of a gun reverberating on the back of his skull. He damn near felt the heat from the muzzle flash, but he didn't hear a thing. He didn't hear the man approach. He didn't hear the gunfire. He only connected the dots after he disarmed the man, and Ivy came after him swinging and shouting. He didn't fully get his wits about him until he realized Ivy was holding a knife to the man's neck, screaming at them to give them a reason not to slit his throat where he stood. Ivy, stop, he shouted as he stepped forward to pull them off the guy. Eraser, you take one step closer and this knife is going into his jugular, they threatened. Their voice was cold like it was when they told him to get the hell out of the stairwell the night he found them there. That was not a voice he wanted to test. Who sent you? Give me names, Ivy demanded, but the man was still dazed from the blow to the head. He was blinking owlishly at them and mumbling incoherently through his rapidly swelling jaw. Ivy shook him violently and demanded an answer. Slowly his eyes started to shift back into focus, and maybe he was stupid, maybe he was just concussed, or maybe he had a death wish because he spat a glob of blood at Ivy's face and told them to go to hell. Ivy's rage was damn near corporeal as they pushed the man a few paces backward toward the ledge and pushed him over until his center of balance was well on the other side, and he was only being held up by one of Ivy's hands fisted in his collar, the other still pressing a knife to his throat. Was the knife not enough of a threat? Is this better? They asked, sounding hysterical. They looked psychotic. They sounded completely unhinged. He wasn't sure there was any reasoning with them, but there was no other option to de-escalate. If he wrapped them up in his scarf and pulled them back, the man would fall to his death. And if he wrapped them both up, Ivy would still easily be able to slit the man's throat. This was not the ideal situation to be thrust into seconds after coming off the panicked high of his closest brush with death in years. Ivy, he tried to call out to them calmly. One step and he's dead, they interrupted with a harsh reminder. Connie. He couldn't tell if they were kidding. He really hoped they were kidding. If you don't have information, then you're dead. Do you understand that, or are you stupid? They asked the man in a tone so calm it sent a chill down his spine. You're not gonna kill me. You heroes are too virtuous for that. You don't scare me. They do. I talk and they'll kill me. The man choked out after a second. It seemed like the gravity of the situation was finally starting to sink in for him. There were several seconds of heated silence before Ivy laughed in the man's face. The laugh was straight out of a horror film. It was completely deranged. It was downright giddy, and it just kept going. On and on they laughed hysterically, throwing their head back. They shrugged their shoulder up to dab at the tears of laughter leaking out the corner of their eye before they pulled themselves together and turned their focus back to the man they had hanging over a 20-story drop. I'm not a hero. Talk or die, they stated with calm finality. Ivy, Put the knife away. Put him down and walk away. I already messaged the cops. He warned them. He hadn't actually messaged anyone, but they didn't need to know that. If Ivy was actually serious, they didn't need any more witnesses to this than they already had. They only giggled at his warning. See, even the real hero is scared for you, they cooed. Now tell me who sent you. I will not ask again. The man glanced over to him, and he must have seen the genuine fear in Shota's eyes, because he saw the color drain from his face as he looked back up to Ivy. I don't, he started. Don't you dare say I don't know, unless you really want those to be your last words. Ivy cut him off. Their arms were starting to tremble. He wouldn't be able to hold the man up much longer. I think it's in everyone's best interest if you answer their questions, Shota warned, trying his best to keep his voice level. The man was holding on to Ivy with his good arm. The other one had one of Ivy's throwing knives sticking out of it as it sluggishly dripped blood. He was looking over at Shota like he could save him, which was rich, given that the man had been milliseconds away from putting a bullet through his skull. It was the Yakudo. I know it was the Yakudo. Give me names, they bellowed. I don't. They'll. Either they might kill you later or I will kill you now. Stop worrying about what might happen and worry about what will happen if you don't talk, they threatened as the knife pressed to the man's neck started to draw blood. Ichikawa! It was Ichikawa you! He sent me! He stuttered out. Not good enough. I already know about Ichikawa. Tell me who's in charge. Ivy shot back immediately. What? The man echoed Shota's thoughts exactly. Who's in charge? I don't know. I don't know. I never seen him. Please, the man pleaded desperately. Ivy, please, he answered your questions. Put him down. I can't bail you out of this, and you can't stop them from behind prison bars, he bartered. It was logical. Ivy was logical. They had to listen. I can't stop them if I don't get some more damn information. Tsukashi can get that. Put him down. Shota shot back, trying to sound as authoritative as possible, but he knew he had no control over the situation. If you're in jail, then I'm out here on my own, he added, hoping that would be enough because it was all he had. The man's eyes had gone glassy, and he was babbling, pleading for Ivy to put him down as Ivy's arms shook more and more under the strain of holding him up. After another heated moment of silence, Ivy threw the man back onto the gravel and delivered a harsh kick to his ribs in one smooth motion. They were going for another kick as Shota dragged them away from the man, already coughing up blood on the ground. Ivy, that's enough, he barked as he held them to his chest. He didn't want to actually restrain them, but he feared what they might do if he didn't hold them back. They thrashed around wildly for a moment before they stilled, still trembling with rage and heaving in ragged, shaky breaths. He continued to hold them there until he was just a little more sure that they wouldn't immediately go sink a knife into the man's heart upon being released. When he let them go, they started walking toward the man, albeit much more calmly than before. Ivy, he called out in a warning tone. I'm not gonna kill him. Cool it. They bit back. Cool it? They just told him to cool it? He stood poised with his capture weapon as they approached the man and tied a short length of rope just above his elbow before wrenching their throwing knife out of his forearm, causing the man to cry out in pain again. After that, They patted him down, pocketed the small folding knife he'd been carrying, and stood up, giving Shota a look that said, "You deal with this," as they pulled out their phone. Reluctantly, he went over to the man and cut off a short length of his capture weapon to more properly staunch the bleeding of his arm. The man was clearly reeling from his own near-death experience because he didn't try to put up a fight. He just kept his eyes trained on Ivy as they paced back and forth a few feet away while talking on the phone with who Shota assumed to be the detective. When they got off the phone, they walked back over, hauled the man to his feet, roughly tied the man's hands behind his back, and started pushing him toward the fire escape. Shota could see the look of horror on the man's eyes, and, for the record, he did not revel in it even a little bit. Even so, he kept a close eye on Ivy as they ushered the three of them down to street level. He did not want to have to deal with covering up a murder. He continued to watch them closely for the few minutes that it felt like hours until the detective arrived and Ivy shoved the man in the back of the cruiser, making sure to hit his head on the doorframe before slamming it shut. The detective got out of the driver's seat and locked the doors before he turned to them. "What's going on?" he asked. Clearly, Ivy didn't explain much. "Eraser can explain on the way back to the precinct," Ivy responded coolly. "What?" both Shota and the detective said in unison. "He's got a hit on his head and he needs to get out of here," they explained, sending a glare in his direction. "Hold up. There's no way you don't have a hit on you as well, Ivy. I can't. You can, and you will. I live here. I don't have anywhere else to go. I'll lay low, but you need to leave," they countered. Sukashi was looking between the two of them with wide eyes. "What do you mean, lay low, Ivy? Don't bullshit me. I'm not stupid. I'm going home, and you are too. That's what I mean. I'm not stupid either. Your hands are shaking. You were inches away from a bullet to the brain. Just go home to whoever the hell you go home to and rest." They said the last part in a hushed tone, but no less violently. "Sukachi, please put proper cuffs on him and get in the car. I'll join you in a second," he said as he ushered Ivy a few paces away, far enough to have a hushed conversation out of earshot. "Ivy, swear to me you're not going to do something stupid and get yourself killed. Swear to me that you will go home," he demanded. They glared at him for a moment before relenting. "Yes, I swear. Now leave." "Ivy, I'm not kidding. Don't you dare lie to me. If you think for a second that I won't come back on my own and burn this place to the ground if you go get yourself killed, then you're sorely mistaken. Yes, I get it. I can't help anyone if I'm dead anyways. I had my moment of weakness and now I live off spite. So get the hell out of here before I knock you out and throw you in the car myself," they bit out as they bodily shoved him back toward the cruiser. While Shota definitely wasn't happy with the circumstance, he was beyond relieved to see the fire back in Ivy's eyes. Well, the fire left after the inferno of murderous rage calmed down. They had been so empty and sad for weeks, and he missed them. They hadn't been kidding about going home. They really were going home. The second Eraser was out of sight, they started shaking from head to toe like a chihuahua, and they felt like they were going to vomit, despite having little to nothing in their stomach. They kept a vigilant eye out until they made it back to the brewery, where they took in what felt like the first breath since they poked their head up above the roof. They gagged on it and ripped their mask off their face, but they heaved up nothing. Not even seconds away, a second too late, and he would have died. The image of the man who'd been shot in the back of the head when they first started patrolling never fully left his mind. But right now, it came back with a vengeance. His face was a horrible blooming flower of bone and flesh and blood, and that had almost been Eraser. That had almost been Eraser. That man would have blown his brains out of his skull and butchered his face, and he probably would have fallen off the roof to boot. He would have been an unrecognizable mass of blood and gore on the sidewalk below, with nothing left of him but crushed bones and exposed sinew. Kami. He couldn't stop picturing it. It was imprinted on his eyelids. He couldn't even blink without seeing his awful, gored visage. His breaths were coming far too fast and far too shallow as he sank to his knees hard. The shock of the impact grounded him slightly, but not enough. He couldn't breathe. Kami, he couldn't breathe. This was his fault. This was all his fault. He poked the hornet's nest, and now they were coming after everyone around him. He scrubbed at his eyes and grasped his hair between his fingers hard enough to displace some of the roots. He felt like he was going mad. He must be going mad. He was losing it now, going completely crazy. He wanted to scream. He might be screaming. He couldn't tell. Was he crying? He was too lost to say for certain. Everything was lost behind the horrific images of what could have happened. He must have passed out, because he came to lying on the floor just inside the entrance to the brewery. Kami. Did he really pass out? That was probably for the best. Even the memory of the panic and guilt that had a hold of him was upsetting. It probably would have been more than upsetting if he'd had the energy to feel it. He was exhausted. He felt like he could hardly move, but he was so uncomfortable. His thankfully sheathed knife was stabbing into his stomach, pinned beneath him on the floor, and his shoulder ached from having been pinned at an awkward angle as well. It took all the strength he had to crawl the last few feet over to the mess of blankets he'd been sleeping in, and it wasn't long before sleep pulled him back into its clutches. End of chapter.